another perspective into this conversation. A senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Femi Falana, he joins us virtually. Thank you so much, senior advocate, for joining us. Conversation with you will be in two perspectives. And perhaps let's begin first with the issue of Electoral Act Amendment Bill. I'll get your view before I now take you to the issue of security and what the House of Reps passed. Mr. Falana, the bill has been laid in both chambers of the National Assembly. Let me get your view on how much of work has been done. Are you impressed? I can see you, but I don't know if you can hear me. So I'm saying we should start a conversation with the Electoral Amendment Bill. So far, with the work the National Assembly and the lawmakers have done, are you impressed so far?
Well, it is unfortunate that we are back to square one. It is very embarrassing that the National Assembly members are being accused of opposing electronic transmission of results in this age and time. Secondly, we have also been made to understand that the limits on election expenses has been increased. In the case of a presidential candidate, from 1 billion naira to 15 billion naira, that is about 1,500% increase. Apart from that, INEC is being prevented or is being recommended that INEC will no longer have the power to reject results declared under duress by the resident electoral commissioner. These are very dangerous steps. As if that is not enough, INEC will no longer have the power to assist physically challenged people or people with disabilities to vote. Instead of the duty imposed on INEC, INEC is now being said that INEC may assist people who are physically challenged. If these amendments are passed, it is very clear that the parliament has conspired to survive the electoral process. Because if you take the question of electronic transmission of results, it's going to be logical not to allow that. Because the registration of voters is done electronically. The compilation of voters register is done electronically. The accreditation of voters is done electronically through the card readers machine. To now say that results will not be tabulated electronically and transmitted electronically will be extremely dangerous. And it's a way of saying to Nigerians that we are not ready for a transparent, fair and free election yet.
There is a lot of implication of this bill to our electoral jurisprudence. I mean, you have been in this sector and you have swum in this water a lot of the time. What do you think is behind the mind of an average or the politicians who are working on this? Because the lawmakers are politicians. They run for elections, so they know the game. What perhaps do you think may be on their minds? And perhaps for you, Mr. Falana, if some of these key areas are not passed, would you consider this effort a futility?
Definitely, it's not just going to be a futility. It's also going to be a gross subversion of the electoral process. And it's a way of taking us several years, back. Because we have gone through this era we had the Electoral Reform Panel headed by former Chief Justice of Nigeria, the Honorable Justice Muhammad Owais, the current regime, whose members dominate the National Assembly, campaigned and undertook to implement the recommendations of the Electoral Reform Panel. And some of these recommendations are oozing out of the report of the Owais panel. It is therefore going to be extremely dangerous not to have a credible electoral process put in place. It's a way of inviting anarchy and chaos. And Nigeria cannot afford that at this point in time, where, according to INEC, since the commencement of the voters' register, over 500,000 people have registered, and 66% of them are youth of this country. The young people want to vote, they want to exercise their franchise, and they want to say, enough is enough. Enough of rascality, enough of impunity, enough of corrupt practices. Young people and a majority of Nigerians are desirous to put an end to insecurity in the country, unemployment in the country, and they want to challenge politicians to address the problems of underdevelopment. But the people in the National Assembly, who with profound respect to quite a number of them, and I know that, I think according to the Senate leadership, we have been asked to mobilize those who are representing our various constituencies to appreciate that this is the way our people are thinking. This is the desire of Nigerians. Therefore, don't go to Abuja to subvert, to sabotage democracy in the country. Because it's going to be embarrassing in this age and time not to allow electronic transmission of results. When National Assembly members transfer money, even when they are sitting in both chambers. So how can you now say that we are going to go back to the era of election manipulation of results through manual management or manual compilation of results, manual transfer? Why are we going to be sending planes to be bringing results from the states when they can be sent directly to INEC electronically? And we must join the rest of civilized community in ensuring that we have a credible electoral system.
What is happening now is left for imagination, Mr. Falana, because if you look at what is happening, if some of the grievances people are having about this process, and perhaps some of those who think that if some of these issues are not treated or are not, these matters are not handled properly, their aspirations and their hopes will be dashed as to how this Electoral Act Amendment Bill will help our electoral process. The last time around, President Buhari refused to sign it into law. With what we are saying now, do you foresee any similar situation if this bill goes the way? Because we had a conversation with a House of Representative member on the committee for this bill, and we had a chairman of the Senate. Well, it does look like they're not on the same page. And it looks like there are allegations that for some part of the National Assembly, there are some introduction, which is what the Senate President was saying, and some members of the National Assembly are saying they are not happy. The Southern governors have raised their voice. The Southern caucus of the National Assembly have spoken about this matter. Where do you foresee that these may be going politically?
I don't think we should make this a North-South affair. It's not about ethnic division or regional division. It's about putting a credible electoral process in place. in the north and south, east and west, you have progressive-minded legislators who would like to join the rest of the civilized community by ensuring that we have in place a credible electoral system in the interest of all of us. But if a few people, a cabal, decide to retain the status quo, in fact, sabotage the electoral process, because right now, by virtue of Section 52 of the Electoral Act, amended in 2015, INEC is giving unchallenged powers to devise any electoral, any process to guarantee that everybody is able to vote. And so INEC is empowered under the current law to transmit results, to compile results electronically, to tabulate results electronically. But when you now put it in the law that INEC shall not transmit election results electronically, we are in trouble. And I'm sure that Nigerians are going to continue to demand that the proper thing be done in order to ensure that the process we are putting in place will guarantee fair and free election within the bourgeois paradigm. But once you say that INEC will no longer be empowered to cancel results declared under duress by force. I mean, you have two senators in the current National Assembly whose election results were declared under duress at gunpoint. Of course, they were able to manage, and skate through the legal process. And that is what the members of the National Assembly are trying to institutionalize. You cannot institutionalize what is clearly illegal. And so Nigerians must continue to call on their representatives in the Senate and the House of Reps to ensure that this time around, we are not going to sabotage the electoral process. And this must also go for the relevant provisions of the Constitution that are going to be amended in order to allow credible elections. For instance, people are suggesting, the bar and the bench, a majority of Nigerians, that we should no longer congest the Supreme Court with election petitions from all over the country. The Supreme Court, until 2011, was generally took appeals from presidential election petition tribunal. But today, from the 36 states of the country, even results of primary elections at local government levels are contested up to the Supreme Court. Today, the Supreme Court no longer has time to attend to other matters. And this is unjust. This is unfair. This is inequitable. There's no way you can set up the Supreme Court of any country that is supposed to be a policy court to deal with only election petitions throughout the year. It's unacceptable. And so people are suggesting that this time around, we must conduct good elections, we must conduct credible elections electronically, so that human interference and manipulation will be reduced to the barest minimum. And when you do that, the question of going to election petition tribunal, will be completely reduced or eliminated. And Nigerians will have more confidence in the electoral system. And our image as a country will be enhanced. But if you institutionalize some of these strategic provisions, we're going to be in trouble.
Mr. Falana, please, before I allow you go, Yesterday, the House of Reps presented a report of its security summit to President Buhari. The report has several recommendations on the proposed solutions to the insecurity situation in the country. Part of the recommendations include hiring mercenaries, declaring state of emergency in the security sector. It's also asking the president to declare a state of emergency on unemployment, which he said is the main driver of insecurity. The House also asked the Chief of Defense Staff to fish out moles and double agents from the military who have frustrated the fight against insecurity. There are 19 recommendations in that report. Let me get your view on those recommendations and the state of insecurity in the country.
With profound respect to the members of the House of Representatives, those recommendations will need to be reviewed. While one can appreciate their concern, we must stop diverting attention from the problems of insecurity in the country. And when we talk about insecurity, we must appreciate that we're not simply talking about acquiring security gadgets alone. The most important aspect of security is social security. You don't need to say, Mr. President, declare a state of emergency on unemployment. Meaning what? In concrete terms, what you are supposed to do as legislators is to appropriate funds to empower the government to employ young people who are roaming the street, create employment opportunities all over the place, stop reckless importation of goods that can be produced in the country, address dollarization of the economy and the control of the Nigerian economy by the IMF and World Bank through the central bank. Stop neoliberal policies. Stop reckless approval of loans, because you are taking the country to a dangerous situation whereby 97% of the budget of last year was earmarked for or used to service debts. It's unacceptable, whereby, contrary to the laws, contrary to the Constitution and some other laws, you cannot take loans to pay salaries and allowances, jumbo salaries and allowances. You are supposed to take loans for capital development in the country. That is not what is going on. With respect to the army or the armed forces, for me as a Nigerian, I think it is embarrassing to say in this age and time that we should spend money to hire mercenaries when we are not motivating our own soldiers who are ready to fight, when we are not empowering our soldiers who are ready to fight, when we are not giving them the tools, the equipment to fight. I have defended, many officers and men and women in the armed forces who are ready to fight, very patriotic, very committed people. But what is their complaint? The money earmarked for acquisition of weapons is diverted. And that is the duty of the National Assembly. It is not enough to budget appropriate funds, for acquisition of weapons. You must also monitor the fund. Those who are accused of not accounting for the money to buy weapons, to fight, the counter-insurgency operations have been made ambassadors by the National Assembly. So you must ask the relevant questions. It's not about a country that has restored democracy in Sierra Leone, in Liberia, in the Gambia, and other countries, whose armed forces, members of the Nigerian forces, members of the police force, who have participated in UN peacekeeping operations. ECOMOG have done very well, and they have done the country proud. What has happened? That our armed forces cannot defeat the ragtag army of the Boko Haram sect. And I think these are the questions to ask. But when you say declare a state of emergency on insecurity, it's unfortunate that the national assembly has not questioned the deployment of troops without the approval of the National Assembly. You can only do that under Section 305. So by asking the president now to declare a state of emergency, for me, it's like merely formalizing the state of emergency that has been declared in the area of insecurity. But what does it translate to? The president is asking governors, go and secure your states. Do they control the police force or the armed forces? I think these are the questions to ask, and not to go to the president belly aching, asking for a state of emergency on unemployment. Meaning what? In the budget of 2021, what is allocated to earmark for employment? And I think these are the issues to address.
All right. Mr. Femi Falana, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, it's always a pleasure getting your views on this matter.